Hello, everyone. My name is Stanley St. Rose, and today we're going to be talking about The Open Window, written by Saki. Now, before I go into summary analysis of this work, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment so that the channel can continue to grow. Now, this work by Saki is very interesting. It tells us a lot about Mr. Nuttall. So, basically, right off the get-go, we get introduced to this man by the name of Frampton Nuttall. Now, Frampton Nuttall is a man who has a problem with nerves. We're told this right from the get go of this work that, he has a problem with nerves. He's very jumpy. His doctors actually told him he needs to get away from, high mental activity. His doctor tells him that it's really not good for him to be around physical stress, mental stress, jumping, anything like that because again, he has a huge problem with nerves. So his sister pretty much sends him away to a place that she's been. She gives him these old acquaintances that she knew, and she's like, go to them. They'll treat you nice. They're nice people. Just go out and see them, have a good time, enjoy your this like mini vacation to get your nerves. Kind of like calm down your nerves, kind of. And Nuttall, my impression of him as soon as you get introduced to him, he's a man that is he's weak. He's a weak individual. He's nervous. He's shy. He believes everything that he hears. He's jumpy. He's isolated. He's quiet. He's not a particularly strong-willed man. And so Nuttall, that's pretty much the character that we're introduced to. So pretty much within the work, he goes to see this woman by the name of Mrs. Sappleton, and Mrs. Sappleton is a regular old a regular old woman. She's married. She has a house. She's in her element. And Mr. Nuttall goes to see Mrs. Appleton, and Mrs. Appleton is doesn't see him right away, and so Vera, the niece of Mrs. Appleton, sees Mr. Nuttall, and Vera is this woman that's she's 15 years old, and this woman, this little lady, she loves to lie. She lies about everything. She lies like it's water. She lies like it's nothing. It's second nature to her to just lie. It's like the lies pour out of her like water. That's how Vera is. She's a liar. She's just a liar. She's a liar. That's Vera all the way. And Vera pretty much when she's stuck in with Mr. Nuttall because Mrs. Sappleton is occupied. Vera is telling Mr. Nuttall all these lies about what's going on in the household. Now, first she collects some information. She says to Mr. Nuttall, "Do you know anything about Mrs. Sappleton?" And Mr. Nuttall's like, "No, I don't know." Anything about Mrs. Sappleton. And then Vera goes into her lie. She tells Mr. Nuttall about that the Mrs. Sappleton's husband died. Her two brothers died. This dog, the spaniel dog that they have, they all died because they all went out into the marsh. They went shooting and hunting and out in the wilderness. And they all died. They all perished in the wilderness. The ground gave way, and their bodies were never discovered. And for like 3 years now, Mrs. Sappleton has been forgotten about her husband and her brothers. And now she keeps this open window open, this French window that people can walk through. She's kept it open, hoping that her husband will come back. So this short story becomes like a ghost story because Vera is painting it. She's really illustrating this as a ghost story that this woman, Mrs. Sappleton, since Nuttall doesn't know about the Sappletons, he doesn't know anything about these people. Vera pretty much tells him this grand lie about how Mrs. Sappleton lost her husband, lost her brothers, lost a dog, and she's living in this house. Thinking that they'll come back. So even though that everybody believes that they're dead, Mrs. Sappleton, she's a sap. She's crying. She's kind of like thinking about one day her husband's gonna come back. One day her brothers are gonna come back. But Vera's painting it like Mrs. Appleton is crazy. She's mourning. She's crying. She's this nutcase thinking that her husband is still alive while her husband is actually dead. And Mr. Nuddle, he's a nut. He's a nut. He buys all of this. His nerves are jumpy. He's jumpy. And while Vera's telling all these lies about the open window, about why they keep the window open for the men to come back home, and all this and that and the third. Mrs. Appleton, she comes in. She's like, oh, I hope Vera's been keeping you occupied. I hope she's been entertaining you. And Mr. Nuddle's like, yeah, she's been entertaining me. She's told me a lot about what's been going on. And Mrs. Sappleton, she's like, oh, my husband should be home soon. So, we're all, I as the reader, you as the reader, Vera, Mr. Nuddle, we're thinking like, this woman is crazy. Your husband is dead. He died along, 3 years ago. He died a while ago. Why do you think she's coming home? Why do you think he's coming home? And Mr. Nuddle is kind of like a little bit scared, and pretty much Mrs. Sappleton, she says, oh, here they come now, and she's looking out the window, and when Mr. Nuddle and Vera look out the window, it's these three men with a dog coming towards the house. And Mr. Nuddle, he's freaked out, his nerves are jumpy, he jumps, he grabs his stick, he grabs his hat, and he's off in the races, and he just runs out of the house, and he's super jumpy, and he runs out. And then when the men come in, they're like, who was that running away from the house? And Mrs. Appleton says, oh, it's this, old chap that's all talking about all his illnesses, about how he has poor nerves and bad nerves, and all this thing about his health. And Vera, she keeps on lying. She says, oh, he's scared. He's terribly scared of dogs because one time dogs went, chased him into a cemetery. He jumped into an open grave, and the dogs were barking and snarling, and all this, that, and the third on top of him all night long. So Vera just keeps on lying. She lies to Mr. Nuddle about Mrs. Sappleton's husband being dead and her brothers being dead and them dying in the marsh and all of that. And she lies about Mr. Nuddle actually being afraid of dogs when he's not afraid of dogs. He's just a very jumping man with nerves. And also Vera was telling him about all this wild story about this woman's husband dying when her husband's not dead. Her husband's perfectly alive, and so is both of her brothers and the dog. So Vera is this woman that this little girl, this teenage girl that's carefully weaving and pretty much has lies throughout this household with Mrs. Sappleton. She lied to all of them about what's going on, and for me, in terms of deeper meaning, in terms of an analysis here, this doesn't make any sense, because Vera doesn't know Mr. Nuddle. Why would you mess with him so much? She messes with Mr. Nuddle. Vera messes with Mr. Nuddle. She makes him afraid. She makes him jumpy, and he runs out of the house terrified for his life, because Mr. Nuddle. If we're thinking about Mr. Nuddle's perspective, this is a nut house. This is a crazy house. A house where this woman thinks her husband is coming back, even though there's enough evidence to say that her husband is dead. And the woman is saying, my husband's coming back. My husband's coming back, and Vera weaving lies, and he's jumpy, he's nervous. So this is nothing, doing nothing for his nerves and his jumpy nerves, that his doctor wants him to, take it easy. His doctor wants him to not have any crazy situations where his nerves are over the top. And so the story, in terms of deeper meaning, when we're looking at Vera's character, she's a liar. She's a liar that she just loves to lie. She's a liar that just it seems as if she does it for fun. It seems as if she does it for fun. It seems as if she lies for fun. She loves to lie. She loves to mess with people, and we can't trust her. And while you're reading the story, you really don't know who's telling the truth until the end. It's really clear at the end when Vera tells the story about how Mr. Nuddle is afraid of dogs. That's when we can definitely say that Vera is a liar, because we know it's the first time that she met Mr. Nuddle. And Mr. Nuddle never said that he's afraid of dogs, and Vera just weaves this entire story about Mr. Nuddle being chased by wild dogs into a cemetery, and he's spending a whole night in an open grave. And we know that's not true because Mr. Nuttall just met Vera within this short story, and he said nothing about being chased by wild dogs. And so we know that Vera made this whole story about Mrs. Sappleton's husband dying with her brothers, and the dog, they all disappearing and they never recovering their body. So it's all a grand lie by Vera. And if this 15-year-old is lying like this, imagine what she'll be like when she's an adult, a full-grown adult. So that is quite scary. And throughout the short story here, Vera, she's very wicked. She plays an actress's part, in lying to Mr. Nuttall, in lying to Mrs. Sappleton and her husband, in lying to everybody, and even tricking us as the reader, as to, because we at a certain point, we as the reader, if you read this short story, while I was reading it, you wanted to believe Vera. You thought that she was telling the truth, but it's only when careful analysis and reading can you figure out that Vera is just a pure liar. All right, she's a pure liar. She loves to lie. She just loves to lie. So that's Vera. So there's a lot of things to take within this short story. I mean, from the get go, we know something like this was bound to happen because Mr. Nuttall is just a weak character. He has a problem with his nerves. He's jumpy. He's scared. He's a scaredy cat. He's just scared of everything. And we know that the setup just shows us what was going to occur. Another thing to take within this short story is that people really don't care about your personal problems. I mean, Mr. Nuttall is talking about all his personal problems and how he has illnesses and bad nerves and all these things, and Mrs. Sappleton frankly doesn't really care. She's only thinking about her husband and her family. Mr. Nuttall just appears in her house and talking about all this illness that he has and all these types of things, and Mrs. Sappleton she's quite bored with him. And so when he runs away, she's like, that's just a weird man. So that's very, you know, that's something to take in. And within the short story, I do have to say, we have to take into recognition the importance of characters and what lies can do to people, because Vera is a very manipulative individual. Through her manipulation, she changed the whole. Through her manipulation, she really controlled the evening of what happened to Mr. Nuttall, what happened to Mrs. Sappleton, and her husband and her brothers. And also, well, it's just she's the character that you cannot trust. This work definitely shows us how impactful that lies can be very impactful, and we see how this lie that Vera weaves throughout the story, different lies that she weaves, how she controls and manipulates people through her lies. So very interesting short story, but that's all I had to say about it. Please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video.